what I realized is that the older that I get, the less I care about vampires.
Oh, I'm just the
Wait,
opposite, Kaya.
really?
Yeah. Yeah, I really, really love vampires.
I I was super into it when I was in high school, but now, I mean, and this to clarify goes in, I think there is a very vampiric quality to the character Nico C that is in this section. And as I was rereading it, I found myself thinking like, I surprisingly don't care anymore. I just maybe not anymore, but I don't care and I just kind of want it to be like I want it to skim through it. But you find that as time goes on, you're more drawn to vampiricism.
I like the Baronic, like Nico C. Like that's my
Mhm.
kind of vampire.
Yeah.
Like a cool, suave dude. I don't get into like the Justin Cronin kind of supernatural
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
vampires,
Some of those.
or anything like that. But yeah, I kind of like the debonair, sophisticated man about town who lives forever.
Yeah, the sort of Dorian Gray of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, like a year ago, I think it was when we were watching the new Sabrina, where that may be the last time where I was truly drawn to that. And then here I am just being like, like, let's get through it. Let's get through it.
Wow. Wow. Okay, there's a lot to break down. This is the 2 month review if you're listening to it. The weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter at the University of Rochester, in which we take a book or two, break them down section by section, talk, laugh, have a good time. This season, we are doing Rodrigo Farizan's Melville, which is the second book of the season. If you go back, you'll hear about Herman Melville's Confidence Man. Anyways, I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Kaya Straumanis, translator and senior editor at Open Letter, who
Hello.
like vampires. And Lori Feathers is our special guest this week, who is the co-owner of Interrogate Books, is the co-host of Across the Pond podcast, and is one of the contributors and runners of the Substack Involutions of the Seashell about Miss Macintosh, My Darling by Marguerite Young. Welcome, Lori. How are you?
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. I kind of feel like you kind of picked me up on a turnip truck or something. When I woke up this morning, I had no idea that I was going to be on a podcast with you. So this is delightful.
And here you
But
go.
honestly, who better? Because it was just over a month ago that you spoke to Rodrigo on Across the Pond. So,
Which
I mean, turnip truck or not, who more relevant?
which I
Well, I don't know about that, but I we really enjoyed talking to him. He's such a nice, good person and so fascinating. I can't wait. You guys probably have more of a sense than, of course, I do of what's coming down the road for him. But man, he's an exciting writer.
So yeah, we have two of his books lined up, Mantra, and then God, I always forget the title of the new one. I always want to say it's Speed of Light, but I don't.
It's
That's not
like I translated it roughly as the style of elements, but Will said
right.
it the right way, but it's something along that. I think it's a play on the elements of style.
Got it. And those are both like 800-page monsters. And then he personally has a new book coming out. I want to say in April. That's about the Great Gatsby for the 100th year anniversary of the Great Gatsby. So yeah, so he has a bunch of stuff, but. Yeah, with the podcast, well, let's talk about the podcast first. That was the first place that he appeared for Melville, which I thought was really interesting. And that episode is noteworthy for talking a lot about The Cure and The Cure's new album.
Yes, that's we didn't talk about the cure, I don't think, with Rodrigo,
No, but he would
but
have
in the
had lots of opinions.
he would have. I guess I didn't realize because Melville is the first book that I've read by him. And like I was telling Kaya before we started recording, I just bought The Invented Part. So I think had I read the trilogy that you guys published, I probably would have known what a huge influence. And I kind of got a sense like with the afterword in here in Melville. But yeah, it would have been interesting to talk about The Cure with him. I'm hoping though that he kind of intimated, I can't remember whether this was while we were recording or afterwards, that he was very fascinated with Vladimir Nabokov. And I'm wondering if he's maybe working on a book.
A
I don't
Nabokov?
know.
Oh, every
Yeah.
one of these books has Nabokov in it. Like in
Okay.
one way or another. You'll see as you read the trilogy, one of the big running motifs is that the author or the writer who's no longer a writer, can't write, isn't whatever, the main protagonist has read every book by Nabokov except for Otter or Ardor, and that's the one that he will not read. And even at one point is like tearing off pages and throwing them into a fire. And that's why we did that book as a 2 month review season in part was to try and force him to read it, which he did not do. So
Do you guys know anyone that's read that book? I tried.
we did the whole season on it. I read it. I loved it.
I need to listen to that season because
Yeah.
I mean, I have it. I tried to read it and I was like, oh, wow, this is messed
That's
up.
that for a 2 month review, that's a pretty high point because it is the most incestuous season that we've ever had in terms of discussion. So, there's that. Oh, it's great. It's really great. It's very weird. It takes a little while. There's strange things that happen, but it is like amazingly structured. But it is quite long, like you're saying. Like it is a beast to get into, and it isn't for a while, if I remember right, to like I mean, maybe it was even like the second episode that it becomes clear that this isn't the real world. Like it's a different version of reality. But anyways, one of the reasons that Rodrigo is on, and I mean, this is going to be a backward segue, I think, is to talk about is because we submitted his book for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, which you set up, which I do want to talk about. But before that, we need to raise a toast because this morning the 2024 National Book Critics Circle long list for the Greg Barrios Prize for Literature and Translation was announced, and we have not zero, not one, but two books on there from Open Letter: Muzzle for Witches by Dubravka Greshik and Melvill by Rodrigo Frazan and Will Vanderheiden. So cheers to
Hooray.
Rodrigo. Cheers, you got nice, nice.
And Muzzle for
Congratulations.
Witches with Ellen Elias Bursack as well.
Exactly. So congratulations to both of them and to the books and everyone else who's on the list. Fantastic, just fantastic news. But that aside, Lori, do you want to talk for a second about how and why you started the Republic of Consciousness Prize for the US and what it is and how it functions a bit?
Yeah, sure. I started the prize because I was really jealous that there was a prize of that name and with that mission in the UK.
The mission
And
being,
it's the Republic of Consciousness Prize in the UK. And so I just kind of contacted the guy that runs it and organized it and set it up and said, you know, I think this is a really cool prize. I'm sure that someone has talked to you about setting this up in the US. I'd love to get together with them and help in any way that I can. And he was like, no one's ever done that. No one's ever talked to me about that. And so we started talking. And yeah, it's been a real cool thing. This is our third year.
Mhm.
Um, the way it works is that small publishers that meet the criteria for submissions in the United States and Canada submit one title that they publish during that calendar year, and a bunch of judges, the majority of which are booksellers at independent bookstores, get together and debate the books and talk about them. And we'll be announcing our long list for this year in January.
That's right. That's perfect. How
Awesome.
many, just for estimate, how many entries do you receive?
This is our third year. The entries are growing every year, and we've found each year we've kind of tweaked the submissions criteria a little bit. It's kind of hard to get that right balance between a small press that could really use the money, that we're
Yeah.
going to actually be able to help versus not going too small that we're closing off a lot of presses that are doing great work. And we're still kind of working that out. But we had 50 submissions this year, so I'm pretty happy about that.
That's
Um, and I'm hoping that it'll continue to grow.
That's really cool. I mean, it's a really great prize, and yeah, the fact that it existed in the UK for I don't know how long, like at least a decade, though I believe, and was
I
always like
think
Is it longer
I
than that?
think it's been going on like for 8 years now.
Okay, so yeah, so about that long. And always was highlighting these like cool small presses and interesting books from that world. It always was like a jealousy thing from my perspective too, of like we don't have that. We have like these prizes that are really only geared towards the big presses or the biggest of the nonprofit independent presses, if not the corporate ones, like the National Book Award. I mean, the translation aware that they added on recently does include a lot of like of more small presses or indie presses, but every other one of those awards is always just like tilted towards like Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Hachette, blah 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 blah. And that one, the Republic of Consciousness, was such a cool anecdote to that, like a way of like offsetting and making things a little bit more interesting for the smaller people. So I'm super behind you doing this.
Well, good. I want to tell just a really quick story that kind of emphasizes the founder, Neil Griffiths in the UK,
Mhm.
why he created this prize. So, Neil's a successful author in the UK, and he had written some crime fiction, which was published by Penguin Random House in the UK. And then he decided, after kind of years of labor, he wrote this book. I need to show it to you. It's on my shelf. So it's this big honking book, and you can see it's called "As a God Might Be." It's it's amazing. Couldn't get he couldn't get Penguin Random House in the UK to touch it. He couldn't get any big publisher to touch it. So he finally published with the small press, but that experience like showed him like, why is it that, I'm kind of like a known quantity
Yeah.
in the UK, but once I publish something that doesn't really fit neatly into a bucket, then I can't get anyone to pay attention to my work.
It's kind
Yeah.
of humbling.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. I think the prize is great, and I'm excited to see the long list. It's always really interesting, and I appreciate greatly that at least some of the people who are submitted or the books that are submitted are featured on the podcast. Which, if you're not listening to, is a really great podcast to subscribe to. It'll be linked to in the show notes, obviously. And generally, you guys take like one book each week and discuss that along with like other news. And by you guys, I mean you and Sam Jorgensen from the UK. So across the pond is a very apt title. But you talk about one book with some other news and sort of notes of things, and it's a very like lively, fast-paced, intelligent, and deep books podcast. So I think it's great. Everyone should subscribe and listen to that for sure.
Well, thanks for including the link because if you Google across the pond, I think
You
I think
don't
you get
get
like
that.
two guys talking soccer or something.
That is the number one podcast that shows up for me every single time. I know.
Yep.
Except that since I subscribe, if I do it in the app, it knows what I'm doing. So it's like takes me to the right place. But yeah, I've done that several times. I mean, of course, of
Pretty
course.
common name, I guess.
If you could plug a little soccer into there, maybe you could get a crossover audience. Just start with
I
some footy action.
I would need you we need to bring you on as a guest because I know nothing about soccer.
My knowledge is so haphazard and scattered. It actually probably would be pretty funny if you like try to use it as a soccer expert. Like, not, it would just
I
be
have a quick,
it would be a lot of like swearing at Manchester City and stuff. But anyways, so you've read
context.
the whole book. Oh, sorry.
No, I just had a quick follow-up question. So did Neil what did his trajectory end up being like? Did he go back to just sticking with the crime novels, or did he stick with the non-crime?
I don't know what Neil's writing these days actually because he's with the press or with the Republic of Consciousness Prize and then he has
Mhm.
started his own press. It's called Weatherglass. I don't know whether you've heard of it in the UK.
It's a great
Um,
name though.
yeah, so it's a small press that he started. They're not eligible for the prize over there, I don't think, since he started it.
Sure.
But yeah, they're doing some good work. I think that one of their titles was picked up in North America by Coach House.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
the Sea something. I'm
The
gonna.
Pages of the Sea.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm. Yeah, that name looked familiar, and some of the other names looked familiar as well.
But now that I say that, I do think that he's working on something because over the summer when we were in London, I tried to hook up with him and he was at a writing residency somewhere.
Uh,
So I just don't know what it is, but it's probably something as quirky and weird as his big as a god might be. I hope so, at least.
that's interesting. Yeah,
Oh,
it's been a little bit of time, but that's what's listed on his Wikipedia. It's Betrayal in Naples, Saving Caravaggio, and then 11 years later, As a God Might Be, and then says that he blogs on literary matters for The Guardian as well. So in the game, but maybe not a book in a few years. So that'd be great. That'd be great.
it's cool. I
Um,
haven't bookmarked.
although Although ironically, no shade towards him at all in any way, shape, or form, but on his Wikipedia page, in 2017, a passage from it, As a God Might Be, made the shortlist for the Literary Review Bad Sex and Fiction Award.
Oh,
Oh,
I don't remember any of the sex scenes.
That's
Sorry.
maybe
because
that's
they were
why.
bad.
I do really like the book. It's about a guy that just like a really successful, married with kids, normal guy who becomes obsessed with building a cathedral and gives up like everything and just like is kind of it's almost I'm not trying to do like a weird non sequitur. It's almost like an Ahab Moby Dick thing where
Mhm.
this guy just becomes obsessed with building this cathedral and like his marriage starts crumbling, his kids are like, what the hell? But he just can't stop.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it is a big book. You have it right in front of you, but if you're listening to the podcast instead of watching it, is 600 pages according to the Amazon listing. So that's a doorstop of sorts. That's a perfect size for a 2 month review. That's the sweet spot we always look for. 600 to
It's almost,
700.
yeah, it's almost to say 600. It's almost too short.
It's almost too short. This is a
We
fact.
should give kudos to the publisher of it. Do you know the author Sam Mills,
I don't think so.
female author? Melville's gonna, or Melville House will be publishing her book. Oh, we had her on the podcast, and now I'm blanking on the title of her book. The water mill, the water. Sorry,
Nope.
but she had a small press for a little bit called Dodo Inc.
Right.
So they published Neil's book.
The watermark is the
Exactly. Thank
yeah.
you.
Oh, yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. So anyway, some prizes. So congrats to all. I'm looking forward to the long list, short list, and winners. One thing that's worth noting is that the prize money is very good for the Republic of Consciousness Prize and is spread out across the short list and the winner. That's still true, correct?
It's actually spread out across the long list.
A long list. Okay.
And,
Okay.
and then if you get on the short list, you get a little bit more money.
Hmm.
If you're the winner, you don't get any more money. I mean,
Right.
it's you just get, I make these like really cheap stickers that you can put on the cover of the book that says winner of the 2024 Republic of Consciousness Prize.
That's fantastic. But that's noteworthy for anyone who's like unaware of the prize or any press that wants to submit to it in the future is that just getting longlisted does come with a cash reward or cash prize, which is not the case in any other prize that I'm aware of.
I
So,
I don't
think
think so.
I think that might be right. I had one year Christina Garza Rivera made the long list, and I think it was for the book that she published with Dorothy.
the Taiga syndrome, yeah.
Yeah, and she sent me an email, and she was like, "I love how you guys do the award money. It's so cool." And I can't take credit for that. That's Neil again. I just copied everything he did, but yeah, it is different.
I love it. I think it's great. I think it's really great. So anyway, should we talk a little bit about Frazan's book, about this Melville? So we left off last time kind of at the perfect spot where Allan Melville had opens up the book with him crossing the Hudson on a specific date, and then we kind of loop through his, tour. He's gone on tours of Europe, his failure as a businessman, all these problems that he's had, borrowing money from his wife's like future inheritance, various other things. Nothing works out. And then we ended exactly when it's like, and then he's trying to get home from another failed venture in New York, and he has to cross the river, the icy river, the iced over river of the Hudson. And that's where we stopped. Now that was on like page 61, and part one continues for a little bit longer. It's not, we were very close to the end of part one, to be honest. It's only like 12, 15 more pages. But that kind of wraps up then what happens to him, in which he uh kind of goes crazy. Like he's clearly like sick after this. He's not well. They end up like he's kind of losing his mind. And there are some great descriptions of like he's in a quote, well, letters from the time exchanged between acquaintances and family members describe him almost as a freak. And they refer to the constant state of constant excitement and the inability to sleep of someone who, when at last he agrees to lie down, quote, appears asleep with open eyes that move incessantly, even, quote, manifesting an alienation of mind. Soon the family doctor deems him, quote, very sick by a variety of causes and beyond any cure. And he laments that if Allan Melvill survives the intensity of his shivering and the volume of his howling in incomprehensible tongues, he'll present, quote, the melancholy spectacle of a deranged man. So at that point in time, they tie him to the bed. And his son, Herman, who may or may not supposed to be in this room with him, or at least his mom probably doesn't want him in the room, stays in the room and listens to his dad telling him various stories. And we could talk about this part for a second because I have a few notes on it. But then what we will go into after this is part two, in which Herman Melville is essentially recounting the stuff. So we're kind of hearing like what he told Herman about his grand tour and his white delirium and his friends. But for now, in this part, like the idea of like being tied to a bed, um, you're like slowly going crazy and dying is kind of, I mean, it's a wonderfully like, Victorian 1800s sort of thing to it, but also like, it would kind of suck.
I think I tried to confirm or deny whether, I mean, Rodrigo's probably read, I mean, he has read so much more, so I could not confirm whether Alan Melville was actually tied to his bed. But I think the sort of general delirium is that was a known or stated fact. I don't know, but one of the things that I thought was in parts terrifying, but in parts also comforting, which made it almost more terrifying, is where Alan Melville is like, being tied to this bed and kind of slowly losing my mind. This is like the best time of my life, kind of. And I don't, I can't wrap my head around how I feel about that. Just to be locked up or just tied down and be aware of it, but also be just give into it. I don't know. I don't know if that rattled anybody else's cage a little bit of just anxieties and
Yeah, being tied to your bed would be horrible. And I mean, you get the sense that he's tied down there for quite some time.
Yeah.
Um, but also like just the the lifelong impact, at least as depicted in this novel, that it had on Herman to spend that time, that intense time with his dad, where it was just the two of them in that room. Um, yeah, it's I think that Rodrigo kind of does a really good job of helping us imagine like what kind of effect that has on a kid, you know?
Yeah, there's a great footnote that sort of refers to that and 69, where it's the third footnote on there that says, is the madness of my father the origin of the madness of my son, transmitting from one generation to the next in different ways and taking different forms? Like that sort of idea too of like seeing your father go mad and wondering like if that's like part of nowadays we'd say part of your DNA, but back then it was probably more of like a little bit more wishy-washy than that. But like that idea of it being passed along and hereditary alongside the idea that this book kind of presents of like these stories and these adventures and this kind of like narrative and inspired in part by Nico C is like also kind of hereditary that Herman receives or inherits all these wild ideas and wild like experiences that can then inform his writing eventually, especially with
yeah.
like the Moby Dick side of things.
And the obsession with water and ice.
Jesus, so much. Yeah, the ice thing is great. And yeah, and so much water, so much water. So much
Is
water.
this also is this also why the other day we're like in the car and I think our 6-year-old said something about snow or
Oh,
snowflakes,
no.
and just out of and just Chad like unprompted goes, you know, snowflakes are not actually white, and they were just like there was no response because no one said anything about it, and I don't think it was until last night where I was reading through that section. It's like, is that where you were at? Like you had just read where it's like snow isn't a color so much as it's like,
It's actually not, although because then I read that section, I was like, oh shit, like what a good coincidence. No,
okay.
I clicked on something on Instagram and I get this email every morning called like interesting facts, and it'll be like the kind of like hook line will be like, what's the first color that babies recognize? And I'll be like, gosh shit, now I want to know. Or it's like, why do dogs lick you? It's like, like snow isn't white. And I was like, give me this. I have to know. And then it does show up in here that snow is obviously transparent.
Yeah.
Like the refraction of light that makes it look white, or like that, though, talking about the blue and the glacier sort of blue stuff is like all that, but it's truly like the transparency. And reading this, then I was like, oh, this is too coincidental, too spot on there. But yeah, no, that was just a random,
You're
random,
just like,
random
oh, daddy's reading Melville-esque things again.
saying crazy stuff. The first color that a baby sees is red, by the way, or that it recognizes. So just for
And
anyone.
why does a dog lick you?
Because you taste good, because of things you eat or like the saltiness of skin, supposedly.
I've always heard that dogs taste sweat not as salt but as sweet.
Oh, interesting. Also, I don't know that any of these facts that are in this email are accurate. This could be just like some QAnon shit that I'm like not aware of. And I'm just like every morning clicking on it and scrolling through and being like, here's something I can drop into a conversation with my 6-year-old, and that will make me seem pretty bright.
One of the one of these days it's going to be like, did you know that the lizard people don't like soda pop?
Yeah, exactly. Like, have you ever heard of Pizzagate? Like, I'll just be like,
Or perhaps kids don't really need the polio vaccine.
yeah, well, I mean, it's a nice vaccine, but I don't know about making everyone take it, you know? Should Jesus.
Band-aids are
There's
bad, bad.
I do have to not to like go too far off on this, but in the If Books Could Kill podcast from today about the worst takes of 2024, one of the ones that they included was a piece from probably the Atlantic, who knows, just fuck the Atlantic anyways, but where it was basically like RFK could be the greatest thing for our country if he just stops believing all this stuff that's wrong. Like he'll be really fantastic at his job if he forgets all the conspiracy theory stuff. And like that's a perfectly bad take that would exist in the Atlantic if it didn't already. But
That's
anyways,
likely. That's likely.
I actually like the idea of being tied to a bed. I'm down for this. I
That
mean,
should have been the opening.
in a lot of ways, I'm like, sign me up just overall. But like, no, but at that point, just being like, you know what? I don't care. I'm clearly on my way out. There's some reference to like, if he lives, he'll be a maniac. Just be like, I, I've done stuff. I'm just gonna lie here and tell crazy stories. And like, I don't have to do anything. I can't move. I got an excuse for not working. Like I don't have to struggle anymore. I can just lay here. That sounds kind of ideal, to be
I
honest.
hope someone kept up the curl
Well, okay. So that's one of the things.
while he was tied to the bed.
Yes, and that's one of the things that's important is he's lying in the bed looking at two pictures of himself, one that was painted much earlier and one that was much more recent, as a sort of referred to as like a before and after. Whoa, dog.
Yeah.
I had that open just a second ago, and now I don't know where that is. But oh, here it is. Yeah, Allan Melvill speaks to those two Allan Melvilles, who, one beside the other, could be understood as similar to those ads in magazines that juxtapose a before and after to thereby demonstrate the curative effects of some new and miraculous elixir of more than dubious results. Just that in Allan Melville's case, the portraits were reversed. The first to be painted in smaller one, the before, showing the strong and healthy individual in excellent spirits, while the second and larger one, the after, offers a degraded man of a taciturn air. And to the before and after is now added a third portrait, a consumed and consummate now, Allan Melvill tied to the bed. This is great. But like part of the picture is obviously the cover, which
Mhm.
is based on that portrait or is that portrait. So that's also
Which,
cool.
for those who have not flipped through, you can go to the end of the book, but at the acknowledgments, and there is a black and white of the full painting in there.
it is,
I
right?
feel like Rodrigo is really fascinated by the curl.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
he writes quite a bit about the fact that the it was so surprising in the portraiture of that era to kind of like have like messy head, like because everyone was like getting your picture taken was a very serious thing. It wasn't happening like 17 times a day like it like it does
Yeah.
today. So,
No.
you always kind of took it very seriously and tried to look, respectable and serious. And then here comes this guy with, this floppy curl on the top.
And that's yeah, you're right. It's very intentional. You can't just like yeah, it's not a photograph where you can just smooth it down for a second. Like he's standing there for hours, presumably. So yeah, you're right. It's very intentional. So paying any sort of homage to it is just right. I don't know. It's a weird silence.
No worries, no worries. So yeah, so he's listening, and then Melville or Alan Melville is talking about his White Delirium, which is a great title. Would be a great. I mean, the title Melville is perfect for the book, but White Delirium is also like a wonderful title. Like that's a great idea and great phrase and great like sound. And as we get explained, is fantastic too. The only other note I had in here that I don't even know. Well, there's two. One is that the first line that we read this week is what comes next is what remains. And I feel like that line exists within the trilogy somewhere or is somehow it references back. And that's one of the things that this book does a lot is have references either back towards other books by Faison or at least references to the sort of general world that his of art that his characters and his writing exist within. So like the Nabokov reference last week to Lolita, there's other ones this week that pop up as we go along that also like kind of talk to that. That's such a Faison kind of hallmark of being able to like incorporate or like acknowledge that what he's writing, what he's producing is part of this other constellation of all these things. It's not on its own. It's like coming from and speaking to a lot of times, at least in the trilogy, a lot of times it's like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Pink Floyd, God, who else is in the Kinks? Nabokov, all these ones that keep getting reference and reference and reference, and how he's kind of like within that world of influence. The Beatles, obviously, Sergeant Pepper. God, there's so many, and now I can't remember any of them. But
Well,
anyway,
that makes me want to bring up I would have noticed it the first time through, but especially the second time through reading. So even part two, which is the 75, but sort of jumped out at me for the first time, really, that these epigraphs are anachronistic to the rest of the subject matter as
oh
well.
yeah,
Like it's a pull from a Dennis Johnson book.
yes,
Um, and so that was a little jarring this time because we did get into the history of Allan Melvill and that and the Hudson River and his failures and successes and failures, and then you turn the page and then there's this Dennis Johnson pull quote and it's like, oh shit, that's right.
I mean the four
That's
that
very hard.
the five that predate the book or like open in the book are Nabokov's Pale Fire, and then a biography of Melville, Melville himself, Bob Dylan, and Donald Barthelme. Four of the five, which obviously would be afterwards. And then the quote starting part one is Jack Kerouac. So it's
Right.
always anachronistic. But that like is kind of speaks to exactly what we're talking about, is that the book enforces the fact that it is now. And like the way that it's being told and the way that the things that we'll talk about in a second of Nico C being like timeless and like before and after, that this book like constantly reminds you that it's being written in 2020 whatever in subtle ways. And because it has knowledge and ways of like reminding you of things that the characters would obviously never know, and at the same time does try and operate within that space. Like there's not within the footnotes and the Alan Melville section of part one, there's nothing really that's like outside of that. Like describing like the boats that they take, the kind of like commerce that he does, all that is like of the time. And Herman does say things like, "Oh, well, when I write my crazy book, or when I do this, but it's all still references, I believe, to things within his lifetime. So that part is like within a sphere, and yet there are these moments that like call to mind these other art that wouldn't have existed at that moment. So it's like a we're operating again on like these multiple timelines and multiple like planes of existence, which is also very, very invented part in trilogy and Phrason overall.
Yeah, speaking of Nico C, there's references to Bram Stoker's Dracula in the
Right.
book, which I think was not yet published, correct, at
I
the
don't think
time.
so either.
I get mixed up whether or not it was Frankenstein that wasn't yet published because there are references to it as well because of the
Yeah.
whole ice thing. Uh, and Dracula, one of them was not published at the time when
No,
the action of
Dracula
the
is
book.
Dracula is 1897.
Okay,
So
yeah, that's so that'd be after.
so the only thing I time checked this time around was blue jeans.
Oh, wow. And Frankenstein is 1818. So
That would have been around, yeah.
although I think in the second section that Frankenstein's referenced, I don't think it's been written. I think that that's taking place, isn't it? Wait, we'll find it. But I think Allan Melville's like Nico C says, "Oh, this woman's going to write this book essentially because he would have been much younger at that point in time when
Oh,
he died,
yeah,
right?
yes.
Like it's like his
Yeah,
youth, so it's not quite
it was
happening
like the I think he refers to her as like the female companion of
of a
this other
poet.
like, yeah, poet. Yeah, right. Little kind of misogynizes it a little bit, but not really also.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Oh, vampires.
I'm gonna hit this one to show everyone who's watching that I need a refill of this really crappy cheap cheap wine, cheap champagne. But continue along those.
So, oh yeah, also for what it's worth, Blue Jeans 1873. Um, so these I'm curious, so like Lori, you without having read other Faison books, you are sort of already catching on to a lot of the referential and I mean and not all of them are spelled out as clearly as they are in Invented Part. So I mean you're gonna be primed and ready for Invented Part when you get to it.
I'm excited. I don't know how I mean, he's got to be brilliant, Faison, right? I mean, how do you I would think that I've never tried to write a novel, but if you're going to sit down and write a novel, like your brain has to be kind of in one setting, time period, heads of the characters, and then just like it's like a tsunami of all this other stuff, like coming in from all different time periods and places. And it's just really fascinating how it all kind of it kind of there's like it's like a the core of the story is like a huge magnet, and all of these things that shouldn't like attach to it kind of do. It's really cool the way he does that.
I'm gonna blow your mind because I don't know if you know this. So the invented part is written. There's 7 sections to it. Those are written simultaneously.
Really?
Yep. And he
I
he
didn't
talks
know
about it
that.
on the podcast, and there's like a article. I don't remember if it's in English or actually in Spanish where it's discussed as well, where he was writing it sort of in, I mean, in parallel across these seven things, and he just switched documents on different days and write like the different parts. So like yeah, you're absolutely right. And also like his brain is, something else. Like like really, really, really like genius level to be able to balance all those things to switch like they're not like completely like wildly disparate voices, but there are different approaches and literary techniques going on in each of those. He mentioned on your podcast, I mean, two things they mentioned on your podcast that I think are worthy of noting. One is that when you were asking Kai about Allan Melville being tied to his bed,
Mhm.
the book that inspired him to want to write this is Andrew Delbanco's book on Melville, that includes a section on Allan crossing the Hudson. And then he tosses off, and I think it's an invented part, he tosses off the idea there's a section that you'll get to when you read that in which the writer is like not like thinks he's having a heart attack. And he's like, if I die now, I'm going to the hospital. If I die, here's all the things I didn't write. And he's writing down all these like ideas. He's like, suddenly I have ideas again. I'm not blocked. I can write. And he's having all these ideas. And I think that when there, the seed for Melville is just tossed off as one of those notes. And that's why he didn't want anyone to take his book of writing about specifically Allan Melville crossing the Hudson was the big central image to this.
That's why I'm hopeful because you guys have confirmed for me that there's heavy Nabokov in all of his books. I'm hopeful that there's like he's planted some little seed that he's gonna go off and just kind of do a Nabokov thing, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways he always kind of is, although it depends on what you're looking for with that too. Because there's so many Nabokovs in a lot of ways. There's the Pale Fire, there's the Lolita with the tricksiness, the Otter Ardor, but then there's like those earlier books like Laughter in the Dark that are like really like heart-wrenching and like deal with like point of view in ways that he sort of does. Although Rodrigo's always more meta and more like that's evident, whereas Nabokov is, but it's always hidden. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
true, but that's the bullshit I'm coming out with at this moment. So
Well,
I'm
I mean, by
buying
the
it.
sound, sorry, Lori.
No, I just said I'm buying the bullshit, but go ahead, Kaya.
I mean, yeah, and if the bullshit becomes a book, I would buy it too, because what you're saying, like, I think what I'm taking from what Lori's saying is that if there ends up being a run of Rodrigo Frazan books wherein he writes sort of fictional autobiographies or fictional biographies of, well, this is sort of semi-autobiographical fiction, also all the things of various writers, classic writers, and even the words you said, Chad, that there are so many Nabokovs. That sounds like Rodrigo could do it. Seven
there's
parts written at the same time. Take all of Nabokov's literary personalities, his, authorial personalities, and go with it. And yeah, I'd read it.
there's also, which we haven't mentioned, Kensington Gardens is available in English from FSG about J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan, essentially. So there's another, which also like ties in this because it's like imaginative flights of fancy and like how that's part of it. I mean, that's also semi-autobiographical in which a kid gets kidnapped, which Rodrigo was kidnapped at one point in time, because of his parents' like political leanings. So and ironically, that kind of ties into, not to make this all like some sort of Gordian knot, but like that also is kind of like a Allan Melville tied to the bed thing, being kidnapped. Like you're stuck in a space. And apparently, like this story is also on one of the earlier podcasts, but he didn't mind being kidnapped because he was like, well, you don't have to do anything. You get to like drink
They let
soda.
him watch soccer. Yeah.
Well, they made him watch soccer because they're like, "Well, what's
Oh,
your team?" He's like, "My dad doesn't like soccer, so we've never been to a soccer match." And like, what the fuck is wrong? You're not even a real Argentine. Like, you need to be a fan of this. And I don't think they took him to a soccer game, but they made him watch a particular club. So yeah,
yeah. You're like, yeah, and truly, you're like, this isn't terrible.
not bad. I mean, as a kid, don't have to be with your
Yeah.
parents for a few days.
Don't
There,
have to go to
man.
school. You just watch TV.
Well, he never went to school. That's a
Oh,
Rodrigo thing. Remember, he like dropped himself out by like not showing up and just going to the library and reading from like A
got it.
onwards, all
Got
of the
it.
books. But yeah. So, anyways, part two. Part two, we get a new weird, and this is very common in Frazan's books as well. First, like a tripartite structure. So there's three parts to this book. There's no fourth part, right? I'm not misremembering that. Um, so there's three parts. There's kind of a transformation in between them where they each kind of like read on their own or with their own set of rules for like how they're going to be written and presented. And in this case, the second section, which is called glaciology or the transparency of the ice, what we have is Allan Melville telling Herman all this stuff well tied to the bed. And their footnotes are gone. There's no more footnotes. There's no more Herman like responding to this kind of like the like objective third person sort of recounting of Allan Melville's life. Instead, we have Allan basically telling it and then commenting every once in a while. He's like, "Hey, Herman, you don't have to write down all the names of the books. Like, you could just like write down whatever, but here's like a notebook to take notes on, like me telling you these stories about my grand tour of Europe and like these things that I've seen." particularly related to a mysterious character named Nico C, who just appears within the telling of this with no explanation for like 20 pages. And then he's like, I guess I should explain who this guy is. It's like, and he doesn't. Like, really.
Just just gets into some homoerotic European Baronesque vampire stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So you're not into like True Blood right now? Like
I mean, it's been a while since I started watching it, but no, I think whatever it is,
I don't know.
the
That's
win
interesting because like
the winter of vampiric discontent. I don't know, but right now they're not doing it for me. Vampires are not doing it. Sorry,
Kaya,
vampires.
try reading The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova.
funny.
Oh no shit. Okay.
Our
Yeah,
a key
she's
sponsor of Open Letter Books Bulgarian Literature Series. Shout
Yeah,
out.
just so happens. Okay, okay.
yeah, that book is fantastic and really scary.
Okay. I will add it. I'm gonna add it to my notes right now.
I
For sure.
think I think you will be back on the vampire wagon.
Oh, shoot. Um, I
The
need
fact
to get
that
a
there's
pause.
a vampire wagon.
A wagon of vampires.
A wagon of vampires.
I
Um,
guess you guys probably, I don't know how this book came into you as a submission, but I've got to believe that part of you was relieved when section two didn't have footnotes.
Oh,
I mean, yeah,
editing
just
it, yes.
yes. And just a couple nights ago, I heard Chad being like, "I'm so close to being done with the footnotes right now," but spoiler, they come back.
Not to the same degree.
No, not to the same degree. But I mean, it's kind of nice. Like I feel like every so this time around, I am grateful for the footnotes because I am looking for those Easter eggs that, we sort of have been talking about, especially after reading Confidence Man and hearing Brian and Chad more talk about Melville, because I am not as widely read and I kind of miss them. I kind of miss them this time.
I love footnotes. I wish all novels had footnotes. But I was just saying that you guys probably were relieved because it's got to be just really hard typesetting and producing a book with a lot of footnotes.
See you, Kaya.
Oh, in general, I think in general it is not hard. You do have to play around a little bit with certain elements, but the thing that was the hardest for this book was the different symbols that are used. And there's a specific order there's a specific order and a specific set of symbols, which if someone knows how to do it and can either write it out to me briefly or send me a link to a YouTube tutorial, but those did not carry over from Microsoft Word when I imported slash pasted or placed the text. So they just all showed up as asterisks in InDesign. And it was not until after Will and or Chad pointed out that they needed to be specific symbols. And then I had to like manually change every single one. And it gets screwy because you like mess with the footnote and it deletes it. So like I don't even remember what I did to get rid of the footnote number. But yeah, that it was the symbols less the text.
Although there is like in the section, I think he references it on your podcast, but it might have been somewhere else where there's like a specific, the ending part of this, the ending chapter, the ending
Yes.
pages of this section. The footnotes are so long that they don't really, there's almost no way to match them to the pages. And he's like, all my publishers hate me for this. Like it drives them crazy because you can't, it's just, it doesn't fit. Like there's just the footnotes are too big. It's like I kind of wanted them to take up almost the whole page, and like that is true on many of that last like 5 page section.
Yeah, but that's my favorite section of the book because I just think it's so cool the way that the that Herman's voice, which was footnoted, then becomes the the text proper, and talking about the typeface actually growing and getting bigger as his voice gets bigger and taking over the novel. I love that part.
I really love the fact the footnotes the existence of them in this book and the fact that it is that dual narration. I think that's wonderful. I'm really into that. I want to say something about that in a second. The thing that you heard, Kyle, where I was like, I'm finally done with them, again, was the fact that I can barely read these. Like I have to like like really concentrate with my eyesight to like, get the words. So I'm just like, once this is over, like, oh, it's like a relief. Like if I had like the ebook version or something so it was bigger, I'd be like, oh, this no big deal. But like trying to read
Yeah,
it on these pages, I was like in the gloaming essentially of like a barely lit area. I'm like, this is torture to my eyes. But what I do think is really interesting as a segue into part two is that Allan Melvill references this where he's like, well, I'm going to sometimes be speaking as a he, as a third person, and sometimes as an I. And I'm floating in between this, like, here's like, a objective sort of like third person narrative. And here's parts where it's just me talking. And so again, there's like not a dual narration as much or as explicitly as in part one, but there is something to that kind of like bifurcation or split. And one thing, oh God, I can go off here for a second. I'm not going to go too much into this, but with the ice thing and with the description of the ice, with the description of Nico being in multiple places at once, within all of that part. So for anyone who has not read this, there's a long description of the experience of being in like in Antarctica where there's like nothing but that kind of white and that glaciology. And that's what he's going to talk about. And then Nico C, who is a character that we can really dive into, is maybe a vampire, maybe a time traveler, maybe a bunch of different things. At least at this point in time in the book that we're reading, or the section we read up to, appears, they're like, sometimes he's in like two places at once and cross continents, blah, 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 blah. This is very Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon. There's a whole like 500 pages of that book that deal with this idea of like light going through certain like a certain structure, like chemical structure and like whatever that bifurcates it and that creates things in multiple places that are happening, very like quantum entanglement. And that's one of the things where I was like, this, I don't know if it is in any way related necessarily, but I know that Rodrigo is a Pynchon fan to some degree, and this section did hit me like that, where it's like, oh, that's right. I remember all this stuff from Against the Day about this kind of weird way that light can work, or that you can think about it and use it in fiction to cause that kind of like things happening at two places at the same time, or at different chronological times, but the same page.
interesting. Yeah, I'm time travel. I'm time travel in multiple timelines. I'm into that.
This is the MCU. This is the run
Yeah,
on the FCU, no, FBU, Raison Book Universe.
the FBU. Yeah,
That sounds like a slur. So I'm not sure
yeah.
if we should use that one. Like a little bit like I'm gonna get in the FBU soon.
FLU sounds like a Florida college team for like Raison Literary Universe.
Oh, FLU. FLU.
Yeah,
FLU
I mean
work.
it sounds like a Florida college team.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they're not that bad. Um, Anyway, so Alan talks a lot. He's the two characters. I think I want to ask you, Lori, what do you think about Nico C? Let's just focus on Nico C. There's a lot of like great writing in here that we could go over, but to kind of like get to the whale, so to speak. What's your Do you want to describe him and like what his role sort of is?
Well, I think that he totally kind of ruins Alan Melville's life, right? I mean, that's kind of the sense that I get. Like he goes to Europe, has this meets Nico C, and Nico C hangs and runs with, these other beautiful people that seem to be money is no obstacle. They're worldly, and he kind of discovers kind of that Nico C is immortal. One of the things that I love the most about Nico C is that he's got this attitude where, oh, you humans, you think that we're all so sad and we wish we were human, and that we don't like being immortal and living forever, but really it's awesome and you should do it too. And at the end of the day, Allan Melvill decides not to become immortal, become a vampire, but then he really is never the same again. I also like the fact that Nico C is none of the Nico C part is like Nico C running around trying to bite Allan Melville in the
Yeah.
neck, or it's not any of those like super obvious or conventional vampire tropes.
Hmm.
No, but he's much more the vampire seducer. And what's interesting, you're talking about Dracula earlier. I'm 99% sure it's in the third part and the remembered part of the trilogy in which Dracula is one of the texts for that section, along with Proust, obviously, but is treated as a real estate novel, essentially. That's a book that's really about like London real estate and some bit. And this is the vampire novel in which there's the seductive side to it. Like their dance at the ball is really like you said, homoerotic. There's like an air of seductiveness to it. The kind of things that he tells him, the sort of ideas and like adventures that he sort of relays, those are all really like kind of, I mean, appealing. So like you say, he's not running around and like biting any necks, but he is like sort of the opposite way of like enticing people, which also isn't that like a traditional vampire, like their what do they call it? Not charm, but like their ability to
Yeah,
like
I
sort
think
of
it is charm.
it is charm.
I think so.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Well, I have a question that I don't think even, I mean, I don't, I wasn't able to answer it for myself on a second read, but why, like, unless you guys noticed the answer, but if you didn't, like, why do you think Nico C chose Alan? Like, why Alan?
The curl.
I was thinking the same thing.
He does say something. It's
Yeah,
here. There's
It's
there's
that
a line.
curl.
it's that
Yeah.
curl.
He says,
That
where is it now?
well, that one that well, Chad looks for it. That would then also answer, at least in the world of the book, why it was important to Alan to have it included in that portrait. That's his little flag of immortality in that.
A painting that reminds me so much of that curl on your forehead, my dear Alan. So maybe.
Yeah, it's
Got
just
sharp little
it's
teeth.
it's like a little affectation to show the world like, or maybe it's Alan's own little secret to himself, like, yeah, I once lived kind of on the wild side. I'm not just a New England Puritan.
Yeah. Yeah, very
I
much.
I will say it in that case, I do like the idea that a vampire or someone who has, vampiric qualities can see something like a cowlick and be like, "What's a cowlick?" Like that's so peasanty and random. I love it. I'm obsessed.
And
Like,
yeah, his the like to back up this vampire immortality thing, there are references both to Nikos' image existing in like ancient like statues and whatnot. And then also like he like we said, like the Frankenstein bit where he says like this is I just had it open a second ago, but he's referring to things that have not happened yet. And Alan repeats some in this of like at some point blank 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 will be the case. And there's a bit like in terms of like references that this book sort of points to outside of itself. There is like one section that was like, oh, this feels very Billy Pilgrim Slaughterhouse Five-ish, which I know is another touchstone for Rodrigo, where they feel like they're like, forget about chronology, forget about any of that kind of stuff. Like we don't really need that. It's right here on 118. And I, Allan Melvill, drink and inhale. Death to the chronology, Cosmo the Magnificent 2 exclaims as a kind of toast. And that sort of comes up at one other, there's another point where that pops up too, where they're just sort of like, oh, sorry, same paragraph. So in parentheses, death to the chronology, Cosmo the Magnificent 2 exclaims as a kind of toast. And then everything experienced up until that point on my grand tour seems to rearrange itself, like postcards being shuffled with the same deftness that others devote to illusionist illusions or games of chance that are never that magic or that random. There's no trick here, nor was there one there. And suddenly I felt as if the entire history of the human race was tattooed across my face and was at the same time my own history, which is sort of Bulgarian in the sense that everything's at once and you can shuffle things and move to a different point, that all of that's happened and is always happening, and where you are now on that timeline isn't fixed by a linear forward and back. And that feels like that's kind of like the Nico at this point anyways, like the Nico C life is that he's broader in terms of like the timeline in that.
It is interesting that Alan, even though Nico C doesn't feel that predatory, um, Alan like feels the need to like run away, like to hide, to like secretively get birth, get a birth on a ship and go back to North America and in secret because he just doesn't trust this guy, I guess. And yeah, kind of the effect that he has and continues to have on his life is like in 119. Um, the overwhelming idea of Nico C occupying every last corner of my thoughts, a being so extraordinary and enigmatic, arousing a curiosity and fascination I'd never felt before. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, he's trying to run from that, but I don't think he succeeds.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, other we can just go on, Kai.
No, I was gonna say, and just to put it into a different context, imagine as either as character as or as real life person being Herman Melville, and your dad is telling you all of this from his like tied down deathbed. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, that's where like the
That's
insanity.
wild. Wild. Like, can you imagine one of your parents being like, let me tell you about my trip to Europe? And you're like, that is not what I was expecting. I was expecting like drunken nights and maybe a prostitute, but not any of that.
And that's where like this book plays with like obviously it's fiction, obviously this isn't a real like history of things, but does play with that tension between like madness and invention. So like if there is like if you take this at face value that Alan Melville is telling this story and that's real, that's crazy. And that the world that you think is real is not real. Or is it doesn't follow the rules that we're commonly, told to follow. Like time can be shifted, all sorts of weird things. Or you see it as like that's madness. He's just saying this crazy shit that never happened. That's like all invented out of this fever. It's like truly a fever dream of like a different life. But then the kind of like corollary to both of those is that it's incredibly imaginative. Like if you place this back in 1831 or whatever it is, like any of the things that he'd be saying, if you take it at face value, are wildly science fiction like. And if it's like a madness that like cracks open a sort of way of saying things that aren't real, that's also like kind of wild and like world breaking. Like none of these things like follow like there's like something there, that spark, that sort of extra that Rodrigo always sort of circles around as to like where does that come from? Like how do we create these new ways of telling, these new ways of envisioning things? And here's kind of like either like, immortal time traveling vampire or like a delusionary like a
Did he freeze this
delusions
time?
based on like yeah on
I
it.
froze last time.
You froze right there.
I
Oh
think
no.
you said they're getting bad weather.
We have a lot of snow, so before this all crashes, can you guys hear me?
There we go.
I don't know how much of that came through about the
Um, we
this.
lost like maybe like 30 seconds of you.
Oh, okay. I mean, basically, like that there are that ways in which the world is broken, and the idea that Rodrigo circles around of like where does the spark of like creativity and like new things, new ways of telling, new ideas come from? Like where is that?
Mhm.
Where is the invention? Where is the dream? Where's the memory? All those things from the trilogy are kind of like come together in this idea of like either these, if you take it at face value, these things happen, they're crazy, or he's insane and sick and is still like making up something that would be like life altering if you heard it, like as a way
Yeah.
of like of something that's so creative and so beyond like what your normal day-to-day world is.
Isn't it one of Rodrigo's lines that like a story about how stories come to be written?
Yeah, and absolutely. And there's a line in the earlier in part one that's sort of related as well, in which it's in the footnote that says, nope, thought I had it, but I do not. The way only a writer who no longer writes because nobody reads him can is another like very invented part sort of line. But any other? I got a couple quick hitter ones before we go. Also, there's a line on just of references and stuff. This is what I've been marking down. 122. Do you dare enter? Do you have the courage to cross over? Nico C smiles and points to at the whale. Is a very Twin Peaksy line, especially Twin Peaks: The Return, where they cross over in the last episode, but also the Red Room. The Billy Pilgrim one I mentioned. Uh, this is scuba gear. That doesn't really matter. Um, the Masquerade. So 110 and 111, it was Nico C who explained to me that countries are nothing but different masks for trying in vain to hide the true face of the world. And then on the next page, like, either way, because now it's time to give an account, ellipses and advances and retreats will abound, Herman, that you can indicate or not using suspension points as if leaping from one to the next, as if there are stones in the narrowest and shallowest stretch of an already melted river of a future summer of the Phantasmagoria and Masquerade in my days and nights with Nico C on the Grand Tour. So long ago that it seems as if right now is another like Melville sort of nod to the Confidence Man. And then my favorite random things along these lines is every tale of a journey is a deception is 1000% my fun facts hide a lie. That's the same line in a different context. Every fun fact hides a lie. Every tale of a journey is a deception. Com do you have confidence in me?
Do you have confidence? And Alan did not, and Nico, right? Like Laurie said, he got on a ship, got the hell out of Dodge.
So, do you guys
Yeah,
have
I
a
kind
favorite?
of,
Oh, sorry.
no, I didn't mean to interrupt. You guys have probably seen Dracula, the one with Winona Ryder.
Oh, so long ago.
I had this image, and I think it's from that version of Dracula where the coffin in the bottom of the ship that in the it gets unloaded and then gets on a carriage and goes the whole way up to the castle in Transylvania. I almost thought that Nico C was going to be down in the bottom of that ship and pop back up again in North America, but
Ugh,
alas, he does not.
It's so
ugh.
funny. That movie, man. Winona Ryder was like 13 in that, wasn't she?
I don't know, but it was a long time ago.
What I do know, I don't remember what actor was who played opposite her, but I do know because this was an assigned movie in a class in Germany I took, that they hated each other.
It's
Oh,
Keanu Reeves.
yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong movie because I thought there was an like much older gentleman who she played opposite.
Gary Oldman.
I
I
personally
don't
think
know.
it'd be easy to hate Keanu Reeves, but
Yeah, I might be misremembering, but that I thought that was the one fact I learned because there was some scene where I was like, they're phenomenal actors then because you would not know that she would rather probably stab his eye out than,
I should
be that close to
should have been
it's
21
good
when it
acting.
came out.
21.
Yeah, it comes out in 1992. Just
Hmm.
why, but and does have all those people in it. So, do either of you have a favorite line from this week? Kaya does.
It kind of does. Um, I do. Alex has my iPad. So one of them was the death to the chronology. Cosmo the Magnificent the second exclaims as a kind of toast, and the other one is a footnote, and I forget what it is now, but it's there's like a I think it's the same knife that Alan tries to use to he claims to cut to extend his lifeline on his
Oh
palm,
yeah.
where
Oh
I think the footnote that Herman is saying it's the same knife that he keeps in his desk now, and something about like the number of times he's had to like the same knife that he has wanted to take and like stab apart books that he's read from other authors who he's hated their books. I'm like, I don't know, I like the concept of having a book stabbing knife.
the fact that it's a kettle on knife is interesting too.
Yes. also.
I
I've
put an exclamation mark beside this
yeah.
passage on page 98. This is Allan talking to Herman. And I hope that these lists of slightly capricious information regarding the capricious behaviors and variable tonalities of ice don't have a toxic and deforming effect on a mind in formation such as yours.
I love
And
that.
then when you think about Moby Dick, of course, it's like, oh yeah, it kind of did have a toxic and deforming effect in all the good ways that we think of it now, but maybe
Mhm.
not at the time it was published. It might not have been thought as a very good asset.
True, true. I have two that I can't decide behind between. One is, and this is from a footnote right at the end of part one, and all books will be one because they'll tell a single plot that will include simultaneously all stories, which is great. And then on 81 from Allan Melvill, to be a good character despite my bad actions. Like that's pretty much a good life motto to live by.
Yeah, that's a great line.
Valid. So we do not have an episode next week. We will be off for Christmas. Um, so there's no reason there won't be anything for a couple weeks until the new year, which is fine. And I need to figure out how many pages we read to for the next one in 2 seconds here. But generally speaking, if you like what you're hearing, rate and review us. Again, there is the top feed. There's a note in every one of these that tells you which feed to subscribe to because if you're on the wrong one, it will be going away at the beginning of the year, at the end of this season. So you'll have it through there, but do subscribe to the other one. We'll be back on December 30th, the week of December 30th, reading through pages 188. So we'll be up to there. That'll be the third episode in this part of the season. And there'll be 5 total ones on Melville, so it'll be just over halfway. If you're on YouTube, smash the like button, all that sort of stuff. If you are listening to this now, also subscribe to Across the Pond and Involutions of the Seashell, and pay attention to the Republic Consciousness Prize US, which will be coming out with a long list in January. Anyone have any final things you want to plug or ideas?
I just want to plug, if I may, we'll be having our Zoom party for the Republic of Consciousness Prize long list sometime at the end of February.
Nice.
I don't have the date well, maybe I do have the date in front of me. I'll tell you and you can post it. The
Excellent.
Zoom link will be forthcoming once we have that long list developed. But that's always a fun thing where the publishers and the authors and if applicable, the translators, all of them that made the long list come on and read from the book and talk about the book, and the judges ask questions, and it's a really good time.
Oh,
Excellent.
cool.
Excellent, excellent. Speaking of things happening in the future and time not being a flat black circle or whatever, there is because this keeps coming up in my life, and it is so perfect for this season that I wish it already was out. There's a new book by Stuart Home, author of 69 Things to Do with the Dead Princess, called Fascist Yoga, Grifters, Occultists, White Supremacists, and the New Order and Wellness. That comes out in May in the US and is about the world's first modern yogi, a Californian escapologist who added some Hindu fairy dust to gym and circus exercises. Ever since, the world of yoga has been full of grifters, occultists, and white supremacists, all out to exploit and recruit via the medium of exercise. From cult leaders to brainwashed followers, TV celebrities, and fake gurus, the story of yoga involves some of the strangest currents in humanity. And if you're listening to it and liking this season, I think you should pre-order this book because it seems like 1000% right down the middle of this Grifton plate that we're on.
Namaste, man. Jeez.